Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Yes. Like the Batman Catwoman. The Batman issue recently with the Catwoman and wedding dress was the very one. Yeah, that's such a cool cover. Alright. Anyway, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is Ruben DeBoard, the Comics Kid 2099. Hello, Ruben.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Tonight we are here to discuss the newly wrapped up series from DC, Batman White Knight, written and drawn by Sean Gordon Murphy. Now, this is an interesting little series because it really took off in a big way, and it's more or less a trial run for what's now going to be a new line of DC Comics, which is the Black Label. Mm-hmm. So that is kind of interesting just in the historical context of this. For people listening to this well after the fact it's been posted, this series wrapped up literally this week. And we're talking about it, last week. We're talking about it pretty early on after that. So I'd been reading this in singles month to month, but Ruben had not. So I'm curious what he thinks about it.
I didn't really care for it.
Okay.
I liked the art style. At times, his style kind of reminds me of Chris Bachalo. I don't know if you've ever read anything by him, but he has done several different X-Men runs, and I really love his art style. And so Sean Gordon Murphy's style at times kind of reminded me of Bachalo, but then it's very much its own thing. It's not, and for anyone who doesn't like Bachalo, there are people out there who really don't like his art. I'm going to say Sean Gordon Murphy's art, there's just a few times where I said, hey, that kind of looks like Bachalo, but it's very much its own thing. I really love the art here, and I think with a more experienced storyteller, I think that he could be a real presence in the comic book world, but I did not care for this story very much.
Okay, that's really interesting, because I found myself pretty invested in the story. The thing that I was waffling on with this book as it was coming out is I was very much worried about the ending. Because I find that this book has a really interesting stance politically, but I was very much worried about where it would come down on an issue because, when this series started, we were right on the tail end of Nick Spencer's Captain America run, which started out great and became awful. And so I'd kind of gotten to the end of my rope on just let a story be told, let it get to its conclusion. I was like, no, I need a stronger sense of where something's going before I can be really supportive of it. So I was pretty waffly on this book, and I was more worried about how it would end. That being said, by the time I got to the end here, I was really happy with this. I don't think it's a great story, and I definitely agree with you that Gordon Murphy definitely has great ideas, I feel, but certainly lacks a level of experience in the writing department here, and we can definitely get into that with some of the more detailed and peripheral stuff that I find kind of interesting. But the core concept I really like, which is surprising because there's a lot about this that I shouldn't like because it does things that I generally dislike in comics.
Okay.
One of them being the Joker's cured, so we let him out of Arkham. I hate that. I always hate that. In a weird way, this is kind of like a good version of Batman's Secrets by Sam Keith.
I've read that, but I do not remember anything about it.
There's
I
nothing
know I
worth
have that.
remembering. There's
Okay.
nothing worth remembering. It is bad. Is it Secrets or? I'm pretty sure it's Secrets. The Sam Keith one where
I was thinking of go ahead.
The Sam Keith one where Batman gets caught gets photographed beating the crap out of the Joker. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's Secrets. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot going on with this, and I'm like, I don't ever like that approach. I never ever like that when I read it. It's never been good. I think this is kind of the exception. It's not the exception. This and Dark Knight Returns are the times that it's worked for me. And I find that interesting because in a lot of ways this is kind of an anti-Dark Knight Returns. This is doing, I feel, a lot of the same things that Dark Knight Returns was trying to do, but doing it with kind of an opposing political message that I find really interesting. So why didn't you like the story? What about the story specifically turns you off then?
I guess just at times this feels like it's its own little alternate reality, and it very clearly is, because there's things here that, like, this is its own DC universe. And so, but then also it doesn't feel like it's going far enough. That was a problem I had sometimes back when DC had its Elseworlds line, where if I see the Elseworlds label on a book, I want it to be really Elseworldy. I want it to be like Batman as a knight in Camelot, or Batman in the year 6000 AD. I want it to be just really, really out there. I don't want it to be set in the present day, more or less DC universe, except that you didn't bother to check on the continuity or whatever. Like, there's a couple of Elseworlds I can think of where it was like, this could have been in the DC universe, you just didn't, it's just a few continuity mistakes, so they slapped an Elseworld label on it. That almost feels like what's going on here. Like, we've got the Joker, and they're both of the Harley Quinns are talking about how, like, the Joker was never he was never convicted of anything beyond bank robbery. And I'm thinking, like, okay, like, he's got an idea of the Joker that's just different enough that it warrants this being its own thing, but it's also so similar to the DC universe that I don't know, I see
where you're coming from, because I do feel like a lot of the backdrop of this story is dependent on you as a reader knowing who the Joker is in comics and TV shows and stuff. But at the same time, what you're getting, just, like, it's dependent on him not being that. Because if this is normal DC comic book Joker, that guy's killed people in cold blood on television, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, he's performed executions live and done all kinds of stuff. And the circumstances surrounding this are dependent on that never having happened. And so, yeah, I see where you're coming from, where, like, a lot of your perceptions are dependent on knowing who the Joker is, but a lot of the conceit of the story is dependent on the Joker not having done those things.
Yeah.
In order to sell Jack Napier getting out.
I didn't really like the idea of the Joker wants to save Gotham. I think that's just it's just not the Joker. And I get it, this is an alternate universe, so he can do whatever he wants with his version of the Joker, but that, to me, seems so far removed from the Joker. Like, I don't see the Joker as somebody who wants to save anything. And so I thought that was a really bizarre take on this character. And you were saying this reminded you of Secrets by Sam Keith. It kind of reminded me of Going Sane, which was like a two-parter, I think, that J.M. DeMatteis wrote. And in that, Joker thinks that he's killed Batman, and basically it cures him of, like, in the same way that someone else would break their mind and they would go insane. It broke Joker's mind to the point where he was now normal. And while that's a really ridiculous premise, I really liked where he went with that in Going Sane. And I don't remember who the artist was on that story, but I feel like that idea of Joker becoming a normal citizen was handled better in those 2 issues of Legends of the Dark Knight than it is here in this book.
Well, see, that's the thing is, like, you say you don't see Joker saving Gotham, and I agree with that. And I think the whole point of the character arc in this is Jack Napier's not the Joker. Like, they are very, especially by the time you get to the end, and they're literally switching back and forth, taking control of the body like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of situation. He's just very clearly not the Joker. He's a completely different person, and the Joker is a manifestation of his mental issues. I think that's just very apparent, and I don't know, that kind of works for me. Generally speaking, I really don't like things that give you a solid origin on the Joker. I like the idea that it's just as likely he was always a murderer as it was that he was a perfectly normal dude who just had a really bad day.
Yeah.
I always like the vagueness of that. This necessarily, to tell the story it wants to tell, says that the Joker was a good man before he became the Joker. And this shows that. Like, the idea that the Joker became obsessed with Batman and kept getting further and further down this rabbit hole, becoming worse and worse off, trying to chase Batman and get the upper hand on him and all this stuff. That's very Joker to me. And then, like, this conceit of this medication that Harley Quinn specifically designed to suppress the Joker and bring out Jack Napier, I'm perfectly fine with that. To me, this is not a story about the Joker trying to save Gotham. This is a story about Jack Napier trying to save Gotham, and I find that more interesting.
Okay.
Now, because you read this all collected, you didn't read this the way I did month to month. Where were you thinking this was going to go? Where did you think this would end versus where it did?
I wasn't expecting a happy ending, and I feel like we kind of get a happy ending for pretty much everyone in the book. Joker goes back to Arkham, but he, in his last moments of sanity, he marries Harley #1. Batman, Barbara, and Dick all hug it out at the end. Victor and Nora get a happy ending. Like, I can't really think of anyone in the book who, except for Jack Napier becoming the Joker again and going back to Arkham, I can't think of anyone who gets a tragic ending here.
I mean, I think Harley Quinn gets a tragic ending here.
Yeah.
Like, that scene of Jack wanting to get married to her before he goes back to being the Joker, and then, like, in the middle of the vows, he coughs up blood, turns back into the Joker, and before they have a chance to stop it, he says, "I do," and is thus married to Harley Quinn. Like, that's the exact situation she doesn't want. That is a horrendously tragic ending for both Harley and Jack, in my opinion.
I suppose. I guess I wasn't expecting a happy ending for Batman, because like, the first issue opens with Batman in Arkham Asylum, and Jack Napier comes to visit him and says, "I need your help." And I was expecting, especially with how this book really feels like, and I could be way off base here because I haven't read any interviews, or I haven't really paid any attention to anything Sean Gordon Murphy has said. This feels like it was made by somebody who does not like Batman, but wanted to tell this story of how the Joker is the Joker is the good guy and Batman is morally bankrupt. It kind of feels like you may have heard of, like, I've heard people who don't read comics say, like, "Oh, I have this theory that the Joker and Batman are the same guy and Batman is just crazy," and like stuff like that. And it almost feels like somebody, not quite going that far, but it feels like somebody wanting to make a comic about that concept. and somebody who's not much of a fan of Batman. Now, I could be off base, because there's this one page in the book where we get to see all of this Batman paraphernalia, and you get to see it's a picture on the wall of, it looks like it's the scene from the 1989 Batman movie where Batman has got Joker by the collar. There's several different figurines of Batman the Animated Series, and that all looks really cool, but I don't get the sense that Sean Gordon Murphy is a fan of Batman and the character Batman. It really feels like he is saying Batman sucks, and here's all the problems with Batman, and Joker's going to come in and save the day the way Batman couldn't.
It's interesting because I feel one of the weaknesses of Sean Gordon Murphy as a writer is kind of displayed through his Twitter account. And I don't want to, compare and contrast writers and, shit talk somebody and talk up someone else, but I do think it's interesting to talk about the way Tom King, who's one of my favorite writers working in comics right now, deals with plot holes and problems or things people perceive as problems within his work compared to how Sean Gordon Murphy does it. So, there's a recent issue of Batman where Catwoman knocks out all three of the Flashes in the DC universe. And it's a pretty controversial thing, because, she shouldn't do that, or she shouldn't be able to do that, and people are messaging him all about this, and asking him all kinds of questions and stuff. And Tom King ultimately goes, listen, the book's out, and you can read it and judge for yourself why she was able to do that, or how she was able to do that. I will say there's an explanation in the book, and if that doesn't work for you, then nothing I say on Twitter is going to make it better. And then with Batman White Knight, people pointed out to Sean Gordon Murphy that Dick Grayson was Robin before Jason Todd. And Sean Gordon Murphy's reply to that is, yeah, I didn't really know that because I'm not a huge Batman comics fan, but I think it ultimately works, and here's why. And then he gave an explanation. And there's several moments throughout Batman White Knight where people are asking questions about the book or about what Sean Gordon Murphy's thinking about doing here or what this means, and he's legit answering them. And, just... a writer is certainly allowed, a writer-artist is certainly allowed to explain what they intended with their work. But writing is harder than people give it credit for, because the entire point is to think about everything. Ideally, nothing in a written piece is accidental. Ideally, everything is intentional. And so when you have just accidents like that getting through to your final draft, when you have things where you kind of need an outside context to explain a situation, that shows that though you might have a really strong plot, and I would say that Sean Gordon Murphy's Batman White Knight has a really strong plot, it shows that the detail work, the finesse of the writing is probably something that needs significant work. And that's, honestly, it's just something that comes from experience, just writing more and more on your own. And I love when we get the writer-artist doing the books. Like, Steven Sejic, who does Sunstone and Death Vigil, two creator-owned books he's known for. He's a fantastic writer and a fantastic artist. And I know some of the artists that turn writer get a lot of flack, and I mean, some of them deservingly so. Cough, cough, Todd McFarlane. But I understand they get a lot of flack, but sometimes there is a reason for it, and I think a lot of artists, for whatever reason, tend to think writing's the easy part. And while certainly artists have a lot more burden to communicate the story than they get credit for, it's a lot of the subtleties of writing that I feel a lot of writer-artists miss. And I think that Sean Gordon Murphy gets a fair amount of it. What he doesn't communicate necessarily through dialogue and direct plotting. He does a pretty good job of communicating visually. I can't remember the issue number. I want to say it's like issue 4 or 5. I'm going to go with issue 5. But it's the scene where Harley is training Napier how to fight. Oh yeah, it's the first page of issue 5. She's training Napier how to fight, and there's a mirror in the gym behind them. And you see Harley Quinn's reflection in the mirror, and for Jack's reflection, you see the Joker. And this is the first issue, or that's the issue where at the very end, you get the moment where, or not that issue, but like that's where you start to get the point that the Joker's not happy being locked up anymore, that he's starting to force his way out, and so he's seeding a lot of that stuff visually as opposed to in dialogue or plotting, which is really good. So yeah, I think you're onto something. Sean Gordon-Murphy's talked about being a fan of Batman, mostly the movies and animated series, but he doesn't like reading a lot of mainstream comics because he's kind of devoted his career to it. So he doesn't read comics in his off time.
And, good on him for admitting that. I think it's weird that people are calling him out for saying that Jason Todd came first because, while that's true in the DC universe, we've already established this is basically an Elseworld, so he can do whatever he wants. I have a bit of complicated feelings on that, but generally I agree. Okay. And I'm a hypocrite here because, on the one hand, it's an Elseworld, and so he can do whatever version of the Joker he wants, but on the other hand, I don't really like this version of the Joker that wants to save Gotham City, so I'm a hypocrite, but at the same time, I do think that's a little weird that people were calling him out on that particular thing, the Jason Todd thing, but what are your conflicting opinions on that?
I agree. He can do whatever the fuck he wants. And I'm fine with that. It's hilarious. Most of DC's best stories are never in continuity. You ever notice that?
Oh yeah, I can think of 5 right off the top of my head. Yeah. Especially since their continuity every 15-20 years gets completely rebooted anyway. So all of my favorite stories are out of continuity. Every single one of them. If you don't count anything before New 52 is in continuity.
Yeah, no. But anyway, so yeah, I agree that he can do whatever he wants. I think it's a weird character choice, and it has weird implications on Batman as a character. If he had a Robin who died, and then he got another Robin. So, when you look at the actual continuity of Dick Grayson was Robin, and then he went off and became Nightwing, and then Jason Todd was Robin, and he died, and then Tim Drake was Robin. It makes sense for Batman to get another Robin after Jason died. Because it didn't go wrong. Just something with Jason went wrong. The idea of having a Robin did not fail, though. Clearly, It worked with Dick. It was okay. It was going okay with Jason, but something went wrong. It could go okay again. If Batman had a Robin and his very first one died, him going out and recruiting another child has really, really poor reflections on Bruce Wayne as a character. Would you agree? The worst possible scenario to his mind happened, and he went out and did it again. And that's without any track record for success, mind you. That's the really important part. Is a really dark twist, and that's something that just doesn't feel thought through. And I think Sean Gordon-Murphy saying, "Oh yeah, I forgot the order of Robins," kind of shows that you just didn't think that through. And if you want to wear the writer's hat, that's fine, but it's your job then to think these things through.
Yeah.
And I'm never gonna fault someone for making a continuity mistake or something. Shit happens. There's 80 some odd years of DC continuity. You're gonna miss shit. It's understandable. But, like, that's a big one with major implications on the character.
And that's also, that particular thing is something that you could have looked up in a minute and a half on Google. Like, it's one thing if you misremember something from an obscure issue from 1950, but, like, anyone could tell you the order of robins, and, like, any website could tell you that. So that is I don't know. Like, it doesn't bother me, but the fact that it was like, oops, sorry guys, my mistake, and also that no editor caught that. Like, I don't know, you were saying this is kind of the forerunner for the upcoming DC Black Label. I'm really curious how much editorial oversight this had. Like, if the editor, whoever it was, and I don't know who the editor was for this book, if they just said, you can do whatever you want, have fun, good luck, or if they actually had some input on what went on in the book.
Well, that's the thing with the Black Label, and obviously with this, is they want it to be more creator-owned things where they don't have to worry about continuity, which I'm fine with. And my problem with Jason Todd, again, is not the continuity of Robins. My problem is the reflection on the character. And so, again, that's just it's a really easy mistake to make, and honestly, that just makes it a little worse for me. Because it just shows... I feel it shows his hand that he didn't think parts of this through as much as I feel he should. And I don't want to, like, sound like I'm trying to be really hard on Sean Gordon Murphy and say, like, just stick to the art or something like that. No, he clearly has some great ideas, and I think he should definitely explore them more. But I try to be this critical with all writers. I don't like letting, writers go on stuff like this that reflects on the characters. I try to be this critical to just about every writer. Because writing is hard, and it's your job to think that part through. And if you're not doing your job, then you're not the one doing the physical work of drawing 1 million panels. Like, come on. But anyway, so yeah, there's that. I want to talk about, like, because we kind of got here by talking about what your perception of how it would end versus how it did end. I mentioned that I kind of waffled on this book because I was very, very worried about the ending. And would you agree with me that how this all ends, how this all concludes, would really have made or broken the story? That if this ended a certain way, that this would be completely unsalvageable? Because, like, you don't like it, but you can see what's to enjoy about this, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty early on where I was starting to get a good idea that this wasn't for me. But I think that I don't know, like, in what way, what do you think, like, if it ended in a certain way and you would have said, this is unsalvageable, how would it have had to have ended for you to say that?
Okay, so I kind of go back to Dark Knight Rises. And that's a movie that I do still like quite a lot, but it has this very particular problem with some very obvious political commentary. Dark Knight Rises is obviously commenting on the Occupy movement and what was going on with that. So you have Bane in Dark Knight Rises come, and he stokes all this leftist political fervor and ignites a revolution in Gotham City. But really, his whole plan is just to kill the whole city all along.
Yeah.
And then Batman comes in and saves the day and defeats Bane. And then, what? Everything just went back to normal? The poor masses that were stoked into a righteous fury against the rich were just like, okay, guess that guy that was leading us was evil, so guess we were wrong. Like, no, like, so you have Joker in the Jack Napier, whatever, in the beginning of this, using a lot of left-wing arguments and fervor. He's talking about, the 1% versus the 99%, which is seriously, it's right of Occupy. That's literally the rhetoric of Occupy. He's talking about the need to build schools, the problems with police corruption, and city governments trying to frame their issues as unique and not part of systemic problems in our society, and all these other things. And that is really, really interesting. But what I was really, really fucking worried about is that this would end with the Joker. Turns out he was just manipulating people all along, and he had an evil plan to defeat Batman. Batman saves the day, defeats the Joker, and then all the left-wing political commentary just, oh, I guess we were wrong. Like, that's what I was very worried would happen.
Well, some of that kind of does happen, because at the end it's like, well, Joker was manipulating everybody. Like, he builds a library with the sole intention of tearing it down and blaming Batman. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, at the end, he goes to Arkham, and, like, Duke Thomas is like, yeah, we knew he was untrustworthy, but we decided to ally ourselves with him anyway. Peace. Like, some of that kind of does...
No, it's definitely undercuts Joker and Jack Napier himself, but there are lasting effects that... Yeah. Like, the thing is, I honestly would have been fine if it was all Joker's evil plan. What I care most about is what about the point that he made. What, like, if all of this, if Jack hadn't turned out to be the good man underneath the clown, I would have been okay with that, provided that you still did the right thing when it came to the people of Gotham and the points that are being made here. Which is Batman changing his ways, the Gotham City government changing their ways, based on the points Napier made. And that's the part that sticks. That's the part that matters. And that's where we all get to literally the very end, where Bruce Wayne takes off the mask. Mm-hmm. That's really, really important. And that's what makes me go, okay, this is good. This is, at the very least, this is fine, if not good. I will say I don't think it's brilliant, and I will say this, I think The Dark Knight Returns is still brilliant. Yeah. I think this is an anti-Dark Knight Returns. I think this does a lot of the same things that book did, and shifts the political message. But
let me ask you you finish your thought, but I do want to go off something about Dark Knight Returns.
Sure. I think that it shifts the political message, but I think the way in which this is written, having so many things that just didn't feel properly thought out, I think that does weaken it just enough that it keeps it at just good. I don't think I could fairly call this brilliant. And maybe that opinion would change given more readings. But for right now, I'm like, yes, it is at the very least well done. It's good at the best for me. I don't think I can call it brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, but what do you want to talk about?
So you mentioned a couple times now that it's kind of the anti-Dark Knight Returns, and I just recently reread Dark Knight Returns earlier this year, and that's a book that, you know, when I've gone a year or two without reading it, I start to second guess myself and say, is that book really as amazing as everyone thinks it is and I remember it being? And then I go back and reread it, and it's like, oh yeah, it is really good. And like, for me, the big takeaway I kind of got from that is that it's very much man versus government, and like, you know, the government sucks, and it's Batman basically saying like, screw you to the government. What do you think the message is here that's kind of being shifted that's different than Dark Knight Returns?
Well, Dark Knight Returns, I feel, has a very right-wing man versus government thing. This is Dark Knight Returns in a lot of ways is an anarchistic, if not libertarian message. And it'll surprise no one to know that Frank Miller is a bit right-wing.
A little, just a tiny bit.
Yeah, like he's definitely got like criticisms of right-wing politicians. In particular, he had a big send-up of Reagan, so he's certainly not conservative, but he is very much a right-wing thinker. And I feel that does kind of work with Batman, particularly 80s Batman. This, however, is a very left-wing critique of government. This is a very left-wing critique of government and social structures. And I think the most important part at the end of the day here is Dark Knight Returns wants less government, less involvement, more for just men to be men kind of thing. And White Knight advocates for responsible, proactive governing.
Absolutely.
White Knight is, as I feel, advocating for social outreach programs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so I get that now. I was a little confused when you were comparing it or saying it was different from Dark Knight Returns, but I guess I'm so used to thinking of books and movies in terms of plot. I very rarely think of themes, and I mentioned that when I did a video on The Dark Knight Returns a few months ago, is that hardly ever am I going to talk about the themes of anything unless it's just really jumping out at me. And so, like, it took you explaining that. But yeah, I get that. I see where you're coming from.
There's other stuff plot-wise, too. Like, again, having Joker be released, I think it's been done well twice, and this is the second time. The other time was Dark Knight Returns. The focusing the majority of the story, like, I don't know if I should say that. I think you could almost argue Batman and Joker are dual protagonists in this series. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say the proportions are like Joker is like 70% and Batman's 30, or maybe it's like 60-40.
I think it's 60-40.
Okay, yeah.
Or maybe even like 40-40, and the other 20% is Harley Quinn and Harleen Quinzel.
Okay.
I could maybe even see that, because there's a lot of character development here for a lot of characters. No, but like, so you have Joker being released. To focus so much of the story on Joker, I think is a really interesting thing, because Dark Knight Returns, Joker shows up throughout that book until the third issue when he's the main threat, and then like he's gone for the rest of it, but his wake is still felt, right?
Oh, yeah.
This, you have so much of it focusing on, like, both of them at the beginning, and then as the book goes on more and more, you're focusing more on Jack Napier and Joker's world through the lens of both Harley's and all the villains and the GCPD and the creation of the GTO. So much of it is more focused on Jack than it is on Batman. So you're almost like Batman's almost gone at a certain point in this book, and you're just feeling the wake of what Batman's done over the last few decades. So I feel there's a lot of like really interesting parallels, and I'll be fair, I don't know how purposeful those are. I've heard Sean Gordon Murphy mention Dark Knight Returns a lot, and how he said, "Oh yeah, I was thinking of Dark Knight Returns when I was doing this. I was thinking of Dark Knight Returns when I was doing this." And I'm like, yeah, I can see that. How complex it is, how much he was thinking through so many of the connections I see to this, I can't say for certain. And again, that's why I say, for me right now, at this moment in this review, this book is just good. Depending on how much of that I feel is intentional, how much of it's not personal, what's the word I want? Here I am talking about the importance of choosing your words and everything, and I can't think of the word. How much of it was intentional will definitely change my perception. How much of it I feel is justified and clearly evident upon subsequent readings, I think will change my my perception of it. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, that could go either way, but whatever. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of parallels to The Dark Knight Returns, and in a really good way, because I feel we've been fucking obsessed with The Dark Knight Returns for the last, 20 years.
Yeah. How
many times have you read a comic where there's a character jumping in front of a lightning bolt?
I've seen it, parodied in, commissions, in art pieces online. I'm sure I've seen it in a comic before, and I just can't think of a good example.
I can tell you 3 off the top of my head, but one of them's a recent issue of Super Sons. It's just it's everywhere. It's always there. Yeah. They're it's become an icon of the comic book community, and that's fine. But now it's affecting everything, to the point where parts of Batman v Superman were just an adaptation of The Dark Knight Returns, and that got a bit exhausting. There's just so much of it that it's kind of good to get something that goes, yeah, maybe Batman was a bit crazy in that one. Maybe someone should actually be questioning Batman's extreme methods. And I like that is happening here.
Yeah. Well, you were mentioning earlier about how Batman having a Robin who is possibly murdered and they never even found the body. And then he says, well, back to the drawing board. Hey, Dick Grayson, you want to be Robin? Like, that makes him a very morally ambiguous, not even ambiguous, makes him a very, just almost an evil character. And, like, I think there's other examples of that, too. Like, the beginning of this book where Batman is just, like, he is just in a, like, fugue state. Like, I'm just going to beat up the Joker. I'm going to, like, shove an entire bottle of pills down his throat. And, like, a lot of that is stuff that has to happen in order for the plot to happen. But then, like, Barbara and Dick are both just like, oh, he's crazy. He won't listen to us. He won't listen at all. And, like, I feel like, again, like, you know, several of the things that Joker says in this book are criticisms that you hear a lot of people say about Batman. Like, oh, why doesn't he give his technology to the police? Mm-hmm. They could do a better job with some of his technology than one man could do. And I always want to scream at these people because the Gotham City Police Department was corrupt. Like, you know, you look at The Dark Knight Returns, or no, The Dark Knight Rises, Alfred is yelling at Bruce, like, why didn't you give your stuff to the GCPD? Because not that long ago, the GCPD was full of corrupt cops. Like, would you really want to hand over a nuclear-powered supercar to the GCPD? Like, you know, it's stuff like that where, you know, there's a reason Batman keeps it to himself, and it makes him look selfish. But then, like, you know, people will say, like, oh, Batman is... And like, this kind of does a thing that I like about Batman, like, where he uses the Bruce Wayne persona to help him in his Batman persona. Like, it talks about all these different like buildings that get destroyed when Batman is chasing super criminals, and then there's the what do they call it, the Batman Destruction Fund, or the
Devastation Fund.
Devastation Fund. And then later we find out that all of that comes from Bruce Wayne, that he is paying for the damage that he does, and that's a good idea. I like that. But at first, I was reading this, I was thinking, oh no, we're going to have another example of, like, here's the problem with Batman. He does all this damage, and then the people have to, like... And I'm glad that they at least said, like, Bruce Wayne is cleaning up after his own messes, or paying to clean up after it and stuff like that.
No, definitely. But, and that's the thing that, like, I was kind of thinking when I was reading this at the beginning. I'm like, all right, I'm a little worried that this is just going to be, like, the hashtag woke Twitter feed of all the problems with Batman. I'm like, all right, usually when I hear people say that, I'm like, yeah, no, you just don't read comics. Like, I agree that those could all potentially be problems, but the thing is, literally everything you've said has been addressed at some point, and you're just choosing to ignore it. And, like, maybe it's still a problem that should be talked about, but if it's been addressed, then you should at least acknowledge that. Like, John Green, the novelist, made a whole video about, like, the problems with Batman, and he goes, like, he does all this, and he doesn't, like, do anything. Like, he could get crime down more as Bruce Wayne than as Batman. And then, like, he just puts in a brief note, I know this has probably been handled in the comics, but I'm talking specifically about the movies. I'm like, well, then you made a bad argument. I'm sorry, you ignored the source material. You made a bad argument. But anyway,
not to mention, that would make for a very boring movie.
Right.
If it was just Bruce Wayne fixing the social problems of Gotham City, nobody wants to watch that in a movie. People go to Batman to see him punch the Joker.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, like, it's definitely something that's worth talking about, and I feel like whenever we talk about this, it's important to address the real reason that Bruce Wayne is a billionaire. It's because it makes for a convenient tool to write with. It, like, why does Batman have all these gadgets? Because he's unbelievably rich, and so he can use it to buy the gadgets. And then when people say, well, he could do more good with that money if he didn't waste it on being Batman, I'm like, he's a fictional character. His supply of wealth is literally endless. It is as endless as the writer wants it to be. I'm sorry. That's just, like, it's... At a certain point, you have to step outside of the narrative piece and just address the real-world reasons that these things exist. And some of it's just for cheap drama. And, like, you just have to be willing to acknowledge that. And the fact that you forget that is a really good argument that it was a very well-told story. Like, that's, like, the fact that people seem to forget that Bruce Wayne is a fictional character with a fictional supply of wealth when they talk about he could use his money to save people as opposed, or to help social programs as opposed to be Batman. You've obviously forgotten, like, what the facts are regarding Batman as a fictional character, which means that they're telling the stories really well in the comics because you're getting so invested that you're worrying about this. Anyway, so yeah, like, I was definitely worried that's what Sean Gordon Murphy was going to go for, and then seeing that come up later on throughout the series, that, like, Batman does pay for it all, it's just really, really well hidden, I thought that was pretty smart. I was pretty happy with that, because yes, these issues have been acknowledged in the comics before, but it's usually kind of like a write-off. It's usually not very well thought through, and what's really important is it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card for Batman. He's still dealing with the fact that he's way too brutal, and that is a consistent problem with Batman. It's kind of hard to read some of the old 90s and early 2000s stuff with, like, Chuck Dixon and whatnot, because Batman says some really disgusting things about people. And just, like, yeah, it's clearly just the writers having their own biases and not really thinking them through, and then there's also the influence from Miller and his, like, super gritty kind of right-wing Batman really affecting the character for decades. But, like, Batman calls people scum sometimes, and, like, there are issues where he just brutalizes criminals to the point where it's like, God, that's almost, like, too bad for what they did. Yeah. Like, it's one thing when, like, you have the I guess I'd call it the Hollywood knockout. Like, yes, hitting someone so hard in the head that they go unconscious, that is giving them a concussion that is incredibly violent and almost never appropriate, but that's clearly not what people in Hollywood think happens. Right. Like, just any blow to the head knocks you out, and then you wake up perfectly fine later. That's the Hollywood method of knocking someone out. So, you know, like, usually that's what we see Batman doing. That's fine, but, like, sometimes he'll just be pounding the dirt out of someone. Like, you'll see him knock people's teeth out of their head. I've seen Batman just, like, break people's fingers to interrogate them. Just a lot of, like, wow, I'm very uncomfortable reading that as this guy's my hero. And I don't like that perception. So that Sean Gordon Murphy is actually addressing that side of the character, which I don't think you can just write off as not existing. That's been a thing that's happened. Seeing him address that, seeing Bruce Wayne grow as a person and realize that about himself, and realize that he needs to be held more accountable, that's really good. I really, really like that. Like, I don't agree with the assessment that Batman enjoys hurting people. I think at the end of the day, there are times where he is written that way, but the overall character I do not feel is that way. And that's muddy and murky as shit, and I'll still stand by it. But I do think it's worth acknowledging that there's a version of the character that exists like that, and to have that version come to terms with it, accept it about himself, and do something about it. I think that's a really, really good stroke.
Yeah. What did you think of the Victor Fries stuff?
I was okay with it. It was like that's another thing where I feel like the details are really fuzzy. Just the whole time frame of this book. Like, they say Batman's been Batman for decades, but I'm like, exactly how long?
Yeah.
Especially the Victor Fries and the Thomas Wayne thing, Operation Paperclip, like all that. Yeah. I'm like, how old is everybody here?
Yeah, because especially in, like, the last two issues, they start throwing around the word decades quite a bit, where Joker says, I wish that they should have arrested you decades ago, or that I should have killed you decades ago. There's something like that he said. And both Joker and Batman, neither one of them look a day over 40. And so, like, decades to me implies at least 30 years. Like, it'd be really cool if we had a Batman with a little bit of gray in his hair and, like, a Joker who's a little bit of a silver fox. Like, that would make, I think that I'd be okay with this being a world where, like, there's some history here. And, like, Dick Grayson and Barbara are both in their late 20s, early 30s maybe. So, like, I mean, maybe Barbara's, like, 18. I don't know. But there seems to be, this is an older world with a little bit of history. But that was a couple times where they would say something about decades, and I was kind of taken aback. But I guess I just thought that when they were giving so much space to the Victor Freeze subplot, I was a little bit, like, I felt like up until the end, I didn't think that it belonged in this story. I felt like this is a story about Joker and his relationship with Gotham City and his relationship with Batman, and the Victor Freeze stuff felt like a B plot that didn't belong here. And then at the end of the story, I realized, oh, the only reason that it's here is so that we can have a big MacGuffin weapon for Harley Quinn 2.0 to steal, and then that can be the thing that these guys are fighting against at the end of the book.
Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that, ultimately. But yeah, that is another thing where I'm just like, the timeline on that feels really weird. And like, that's just the detail stuff, right? Like, that's the part where I don't feel it was thought through enough. But at the same time, I kind of like some of the stuff that's done with Freeze. Like,
me too.
How he's got this whole commentary on how he could never forgive his father for his Nazi past, and how his father helped the Allies fight against the Soviets in the Cold War, ironically. Like, that was... I really like that line, I can't lie. And then when he gets to right at the last issue, and Batgirl's getting, strangled by Poison Ivy and Neo Joker, and she goes, "You should have brought backup," and she goes, "I did." And Freeze just blasts Poison Ivy in the back, and he goes, "I'm all out of ice puns." I'm like, it's an ice pun, though. It totally is. Like, that's really... that kind of stuff really worked for me. But yeah, I do think the Victor Freeze stuff is one of the weaker elements here, though. I'd agree with that. It's not, it's not book-breaking, but it's just another little tally of, like, this is kind of wishy-washy. And I just don't feel like the details were thought through very well.
And there's some stuff that he does with Victor, like the fact that he is the son of a Nazi war criminal, and his wife was a Jew, and he fell in love with her. Like, that's all really interesting. I wish that he could have taken all that and done a separate book. Like, do another book in the DC Black label with Victor Freeze, like, in Nazi Germany, and his father is a scientist in World War II. Like, I think that would have been really interesting, and just completely separate it from Batman. And if you have to include some other Batman characters, you could have Alfred being an agent for the OSS, like, or not the OSS, but
MI6.
MI6, yeah. And that's, in Alfred's character. So, like, that would have been really cool. I think you could have done something like that, because I think here it ultimately, and I agree, it's not quite book breaking, but it was an irritant in my mind when I was like seeing that Victor Freeze is going to play a big part in this. And like, there was one point, it was an end of the issue reveal where Victor says that he knows who Batman, or like, he's talking to Batman, and he says, "I know who you are, Bruce." And then the next issue doesn't pick up on that at all. The next time we see that, I think, is 2 issues later, and he's talking to Barbara about it. Like, we don't get to see Batman react to that or handle that situation, and I don't know, in this world, since it is a different world, is Victor Freeze a bad guy who is now reformed, or is he always been just an okay guy who happens to have an ice suit and he froze his wife?
I think the argument is he's like reformed and now working with Bruce Wayne because Bruce is desperate to save Alfred.
Okay.
So I want to talk about that because it's connected to Mr. Freeze. For my money, Sean Gordon Murphy has written the best Alfred Death ever.
Yeah. And I don't think Alfred gets any lines of dialogue except for the letter that he writes at the end of the book, the very last thing that we see. But yeah, at first I was like, okay, how did Alfred hook up all this? And then later we see that Freeze was involved, and I liked that. I liked that Alfred. I liked it. Yeah.
See, I didn't really care for the Freeze element of that. I would have been fine if Alfred just hooked Bruce up himself. Because, I don't know, he's Alfred. He's got magical medical knowledge. For me, the thing that really works is Bruce is trying to take care of Alfred, but can't stop being Batman, gets fucked up as Batman, and comes to Alfred's bedside to try to take care of himself and keep an eye on Alfred, and then collapses due to blood loss, and wakes up in Alfred's hospital bed with Alfred dead in a chair in the corner. That is the most quintessential Batman and Alfred relationship, and the exact way that Alfred would die. I totally bought that, and it was so wonderfully tragic. To compare it again to Dark Knight Returns, since that kills off Alfred as well, the Alfred death in that feels so tacked on and last-minute thought, and it doesn't have any circumstance. The Alfred death in this is so sad.
In a lot of ways, it feels like what the movie Batman and Robin was almost trying to do, and then they pulled their punch at the last minute.
No, definitely, and it's obvious that a lot of the movies and the animated series has influenced this a lot more than the comics have directly. Because the whole Freeze side of things is kind of the plot of Batman and Robin, but done right. And so that's really interesting. But yeah, the Alfred death, and then you get the funeral, and it's silent. It's a silent funeral, and you just get the panels, and you got the picture of Alfred in uniform, and the 3 pictures of him with Bruce as a kid. Oh, it's so good. That is hands down one of the best parts of the book, and yeah, if DC ever wants to kill off Alfred, that's the way to do it. So yeah, I really, really liked that scene. Let me get your thoughts on the other major element of the story that we haven't talked about yet. What'd you think of the 2 Harleys?
I like the idea that Joker is so narcissistic that he doesn't even notice that another woman has moved in and has taken the place of his girlfriend. I think that is brilliant, because I generally don't like the idea of, first of all, I don't like the idea that Joe Schmo and the public has latched onto that Joker and Harley have a beautiful relationship. No, it's a very, very ugly, brutal, violent, misogynistic relationship. It's not your Romeo and Juliet that you should strive for. So no, that's just all bad. But I like that this is saying, Joker is so self-obsessed and so obsessed with Batman, he doesn't even notice that this other woman has come in and replaced Harley Quinn. Having said that, the whole idea at first starts off with the original Harley Quinn is in love with the man that behind the Joker. She's in love with Jack Napier, and she loves him despite the Joker. Whereas the new Harley, or Neo Joker as they start to call her, she is in love with the crazy, dangerous Joker himself. But then we find out that Neo Joker, she's talking about when they first met, how he never even laid a hand on me. He gently he cleansed my wounds, and he tended to my wounds, and he was just this beautiful, tender guy. Okay, so in that case then, Neo Joker also is in love with the guy behind the Joker. She's not in love with the crazy, dangerous guy that she says she's in love with. So, I don't know, I don't think that the dichotomy between these 2 Harleys works the way that they think it does, but I did really like the idea of Joker not even realizing.
Okay, and I think the dichotomy works a little better than you're giving it credit for. I think what you're talking about, the whole he didn't lay a hand on me thing, I think that was meant to be before, like, just her first time with the Joker, as it were.
Okay.
I don't think that's meant to be their relationship long term.
Gotcha.
God, I'm trying to find the issue where that was all revealed, and I can't remember it for the life of me. But anyway, yeah, I'm pretty sure the implication was that was just their first encounter, and that's why she stayed, is because her perception of how he would treat her was off. I think that it's fairly evident from the way she talks about him that they do have an abusive relationship after that.
Okay.
To me, the whole relationship between the two Harleys is really well epitomized in their final interaction during the fire escape fight scene that they have, where Neo Joker says, "You gotta face it, sister. When you first fell in love with him, he wasn't Jack. He was the Joker. You don't want to admit it because you feel ashamed that once upon a time you fell in love with an abusive, loveless serial killer. That's the reason you hate me. I'm the dirty little reminder of what you used to be." Man, I love that. That is so perfect. Because Harley Quinn has been used as rightfully so, as metaphor for women in abusive relationships. And unfortunately, I don't think Harley Quinn is written very well in the comics very often. And I think this book does some stuff with Harley Quinn that is legitimately interesting. That is legitimately compelling. That you have this version of the Joker who does have a good man underneath it all, but it doesn't stop the fact that he is an abusive, murderous serial killer.
Yeah.
Technically not, but whatever. And so, from the abusive side of things, I really like that Neo Joker's like, no, you were in an abusive relationship. It doesn't matter that there was a good man underneath it all. He was the Joker. And then Neo Joker's like, I fell in love with the abuser. I loved him because he abused me. And I know that's fucked up, but it's the only time I've ever felt love. So that's where I'm at. And, like, that's also really fucking interesting. So somehow in the same series, we've gotten two incredibly distinct and different takes on Harley Quinn, both of which I like.
Yeah. I like that the original Harley, that she's not just a pretty face who's there to crack jokes and look sexy, and that's a lot of times what Harley is used for. I like that here, while I think that her overall master plan requires a lot of, and then this happens, like, it gets kind of contrived. Like, her whole plan hinged on Batman getting angry enough to shove pills down Joker's throat. Like, what if there's 1,000 different ways that could have not happened, but that's just, comics for you, I guess. But I do like that she is a thinker and that she's using her brain, and it's what when we got her origin in the animated series, like, she's a psychiatrist. She should be able to use her brain. She shouldn't just be, haha, I'm Harley, Mr. J. Like, that's all she ever is. That's my
Dynamite Harley Quinn impression.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And to your point about her origin seeming kind of off, and that she doesn't seem to be in love with the abuser, that's another thing where I think, yeah, you might be right on that, or maybe I'm being too generous, one of those two. That could very well just be one of those things where it just wasn't thought out enough. And it's unfortunate, because I like a lot of the ideas, and I feel like this has a certain level of dependence on you just knowing things about these characters, having a version of these characters in your head, and this just kind of wants you to run with that. So I think that might be what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm trying to think if there's anything else here that I think needed to be addressed.
Well, I really like the idea of Harley Quinn becoming Neo Joker when Joker fell out. I thought that was really, really strong. And that worked really, really well. Especially because, like, she's doing it to try to draw the Joker out because the Joker would never let himself be overshadowed by his sidekick. Man, I really like that, because that is right out of the animated series, out of, like, the best Harley Quinn episode, Mad Love, right? Where Joker gets, like, super pissed at Harley for maybe being the one to kill Batman, and he can't let her have credit for it. So the idea that Harley 2.0, Neo Joker, whatever you want to call her, knows that about him, and uses that to try to draw him out, and it fucking works, is really, really brilliant. But I also like that it kind of backfires on her because it works too well. Yeah. To the point where it's not just that it draws him out and he gets mad at her. It's that it draws him out and now he hates her. And he has that line, it's like, I want to show her how to swallow all her teeth. And like, God, that's really fucking violent imagery. And with the Joker, I totally buy it, right? So yeah, I don't know. That one really, really worked for me in a way I was surprised to see. The idea of doing two Harleys, I really expected it to just be him trying to write her out because he didn't like Suicide Squad style Harley Quinn, and he liked, classic style Harley Quinn. So I thought it was just him trying to write out new Harley that we've gotten over the years. And no, I guess turns her into a really solid character.
Yeah, and I think he is doing a little bit of a take that on I would say the post-Arkham games versions of Harley. Like, I'd say that's really where the break kind of starts. Because he has older Harley, or first Harley saying, like, like, you're just a younger face with a bigger rack, or something like that. But then, like you say, he does turn new Harley into kind of an ongoing character with growth and change. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah. I feel like, a slight nitpick, and this is just purely a plot thing, and it's one of those things where it kind of has to happen for the rest of the story to happen. I did think it was a little silly that Joker says he cannot use Mad Hatter's mind control technology on all of the villains of Gotham because that would be too many of them to control, but he can use it on Clayface, and then he can feed Clayface to the villains, and then he can control the villains. I thought that was a little silly, but it's one of those things where that has to happen in order for the rest of the story to progress in this way.
I was actually fine with that. I thought that was kind of brilliant, because we've done stuff like that with Mad Hatter, where he tries to control too many people, and it stops working. He starts losing control left and right. And so doing it using Clayface as the vehicle and kind of a plot device to kick around, I was pretty happy with that. I don't think that was plot hole. It is maybe a contrivance, but I was totally fine with it.
Okay.
I want to talk more about the art because, again, Sean Gordon Murphy is, of course, not just the writer, he is the artist. I kind of love the style of this. I love that it's, and I mean this well, it's kind of ugly. It's ugly and gritty and kind of hard to look at sometimes. And I think it's supposed to be. Again, to parallel it to Dark Knight Returns, I think it's trying to be a bit hard to look at because this isn't like your typical big, epic, cool-looking superhero stuff. This is kind of like darker, and it's got like the shading, the inking is really, really well done in this, and I quite like it. Like, even from the very beginning, that first page, or like that first sequence of Jack Napier driving to Arkham in the Batmobile, it's pulled right out of Arkham Asylum, or no, not Arkham Asylum, Killing Joke. It's pulled right out of Killing Joke, and like just look at Batman looking down Napier chained up in Arkham. Oof, that's good stuff. That stuff really works for me.
When you were talking about how this is the anti-Dark Knight Returns, I was in my mind, I was thinking about bringing up Killing Joke, and I just forgot. But yeah, that opening scene is very Killing Joke-ish.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, like that whole scene really works for me. Just a lot of the shading and the lighting effects put on here are really, really good. Also, the thing that I love that is done consistently throughout the whole book, it's even on the cover of issue 1, is Joker having 2 different colored eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. And the other thing that's, like, super, super interesting in it is Joker's pupil's a bat symbol.
Yeah,
in
I
his
noticed
purple
that.
eye. And I really, really like that.
Yeah, I thought I noticed that. I feel like that was in the content of the issues, also, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's in the issues itself.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, I like that. I a long time ago, when I was a teenager, I tried drawing a picture of the Joker. It wasn't very good, but I tried doing the thing where like his eye was a pupil, or the pupil of his eye was a bat symbol. Didn't work out at all, but I'm glad to see that that's something that like, and I feel like that's something that's probably been going on since the 90s. I feel like I've seen that in like, isn't the cover of The Man Who Laughs, doesn't it do that?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
I feel like maybe I'm wrong, but it's something that, and that's not a bad thing. That's not to say that like, oh, he's being derivative. Like, you know, he's pulling from different influences. I'm sure, but that's something that. No, it's not The Man Who Laughs. Yeah. I don't know.
It's just one of those things. It's really interesting, and I feel like it really works just on its own. It seems like one of those things where a lot of people come up with this same idea. I know in Green Lantern a lot we've done that, where the symbol will be in the pupil of the Green Lantern, and I always think that's cool. So it's just cool whenever Joker shows up in this, and he looks so damn. It just makes him look wily and evil, and I love it. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Issue 7 probably has some of the best images of the Joker like that, which is really great because every time he shows up, it's super fucked. Like every time Joker shows up after the first issue, it is so damn creepy. Like at the end of issue 6 when Jack just loses it in the middle of the police department, and like all the cops start pointing their guns right at Joker because he's out now. Oh god, that was such a good cliffhanger. Like that's the thing you'll never get reading it all at once, because there's no way in hell you could stop yourself and not turn to the next issue once you read this in trade or something. Reading it month to month in singles, god, that was a fantastic cliffhanger. So yeah, a lot of the art I thought was really cool. There's a moment in the issues where it's just told visually. It doesn't hold your hand and explain what happens. It's just told visually, and it begins to show the rift emerging between Gordon and Batman, where the bat symbol breaks between them, and Batman says, "I'll get you a new one," and Gordon's like, "No, this is over. We're done." Like, God, that's a really good scene, and it's just visually on the ground. There's just a panel where there's a broken bat signal between Batman and Commissioner Gordon. I thought that was really, really well done.
By the way, the cover I'm thinking of is from Scott Snyder's Detective Comics run before the New 52. The cover is by Jock, and it's actually a whole bunch of bats kind of making up the top half of Joker's face, and then there's like two bat signals making his eyes.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay, that was what I was thinking of. I guess that was one of the ones I was thinking of.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff in here art-wise that I really like. Symbol things like Sean Gordon Murphy's a bit of a gearhead. And so you get the GTO cars, which are all like muscle cars, and that was pretty cool. I have no doubt in my mind that GTO was used very specifically because Sean Gordon Murphy's a bit of a gearhead. As the acronym for the Gotham Terror Organization or whatever it's supposed to be. GTO being, Pontiac GTO. So I have no doubt in my mind that happened. So, like, that was pretty cool, and he got all the GTO cars. And then when the fuck every Batmobile starts coming up, that was cool as shit. In the last issue, when you got all the Batmobiles, you got the fucking animated series one in there, you got the 89 one, you got the Tumbler, and then Sean Gordon Murphy's own design for the Batmobile. All of those are so fucking cool to see together on screen. I'm pretty sure they even get the 60s Batmobile in there, the Adam West one.
Yeah, I think so.
God, that was so cool. I was so ready for that. That was so freaking neat.
Yeah.
The only one I don't recognize is the one I think Bullock's driving that's like kind of a Jeep or something. Yeah, you even got like the 40s one where it's got like the old hatchback kind of look to it. The coupe. That was just so cool to see all the Batmobiles driving together on page like that. I guess it's issue 7 and 8, but yeah. I just really like that. That was a pretty cool turn. I just, oh man, I thought that was too neat. Too neat for words.
Yeah. Speaking of the Batmobiles, I feel like one thing that, and this is another, I feel like a plot contrivance, and maybe it's just me being too critical, too, like, picky, but there's a big sticking point everyone has with Batman is he does all this damage, and then the city has to pay, like, $3 billion a year to clean up after him, and, like, that was one of Joker's big, like, campaign things against Batman. And then, like, he buys Batmobiles for the GTO, and then, like, they are absolutely destroying the city, trying to chase Batman. And I was just like, come on, like, that was your complaint against Batman, and you're doing the same thing. Like,
well, to be fair, it's Batman that's destroying the city, because he's not. Like, they classify Batman as a super criminal because of what he's doing, like, when he destroys the bridge. It's not the GTO that destroyed the bridge. It was very, very obviously Batman's actions.
I thought there was a scene where they were doing some destructive stuff, but I could be wrong. It's been a few days since I read it. I feel like they were doing some pretty reckless driving that I was like, yeah, you guys are just as bad as Batman here. Like, and I don't remember, because
I don't know. No one's driving on rooftops, to be fair. Yeah. No one's driving around on rooftops. The GTO just kind of like directs traffic and uses their cars to do like some pincer stuff, and then Batman kind of ruins the operation. Like what we see the GTO doing is not having a direct effect on the city property that as much. It's more Batman's actions themselves, I feel. At least that's the stuff communicated in the art itself. I mean, there's of course the underlying notion of, yeah, driving really fast in the city is like a problem. Like, you ever seen Hot Fuzz?
No.
Oh, guys, like this, it's just like Shaun of the Dead, where it's making fun of every cop movie. And like they show like the super straight-laced cop, Point Break or whatever, and he goes, well, I've never been in a car chase that extreme, but if I was, there'd be so much paperwork. So, like, at least in the sense of like the Hollywood car chase kind of stuff, where no one that we don't see gets hurt. I think it's reasonable to say that the stuff that we're seeing the cops do in this just is meant to not be affecting the city. It's all Batman's fault.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't know. I quite like a bunch of this stuff. Did you have any moments in the art that really stood out to you?
I'm trying to think. I'm sure there were some that I liked. But at the moment, and like I say, I read it a few days ago. At the moment, nothing is jumping out to me. But if I had it in front of me right now, and I don't, I could probably be like, oh yeah, there was that one thing. But at the moment, I can't think of anything.
I really liked, I think it's in issue 4 maybe, where we did Harley and Jack's date night. I thought that was a really, really well done page, where it's no dialogue or anything. It's all just seeing them out happy together. Well, I guess there's a line that is put throughout the entire scene, but it's no dialogue from them. It's just them having a great night together. The way he draws Harley's dress is absolutely beautiful. I legit believe that these two are kind of mad about each other. I particularly like the last panel where they're clearly getting a lot of lust, and then it cuts over and it's like the afterglow of sex with them. I thought that was pretty good. It's just really, really beautiful stuff. I also really like the design work for Neo Joker as a villain. I thought that was really cool. Of like, what would Harley Quinn do if she wanted to be the Joker? And I thought that was a pretty strong design choice. Particularly the white hair, that really stands out really well. You get it right at the beginning of issue 3. You get the reveal of Neo Joker, and that really, really works for me. I really, really like that design.
That design kind of reminded me a little bit of before Suicide Squad. I think it was even before Dark Knight Rises. The actress Kristen Bell. She was campaigning pretty hard to play Harley Quinn in, like, any movie. Like, she said once that she would play Harley Quinn without even reading the script. Like, she really wanted to play Harley Quinn. And then I saw people doing, like, Photoshop versions of what she would look like as Harley Quinn. And I feel like the Neo Joker design kind of looks a little bit like that. It's different. It's not exactly the same, but I feel like he must have seen one of those, and that must have been in the back of his mind when he was designing Neo Joker.
I have no idea. I doubt it, honestly, because I feel like Sean Murphy does a really good job of character design work. At no point do I look at any of the characters on this and go, who's that again? Which is, obviously with Batman and Joker, that's easy to do, but making Jack Napier stand out, since he's supposed to look like just a straight-laced normal guy, seems really hard, and yet he does it well. And even when Joker and Jack are switching back and forth, it still looks like it's the same guy underneath it all, which I really like. It's just Joker's hair changes and obviously the skin tone, but like the only physical feature that changes is the hair. And I think that was really good. And so like Jack Napier, like, I never look at a panel and go, wait, is that the mayor? And part of that is just not putting him on panel with guys that would have a reason to look similar. But I never, like, don't know who somebody is. And so that's, it's a subtle thing that's important. Because I know I've read comics from, like, wait, who's this guy again? And that doesn't happen here. So Sean Murphy definitely has that part of character design under wraps, and I feel like he does it really, really well. So that part I was really, really happy with. All right, I want to talk and wrap up here on the politics, because this is another thing Sean Murphy has talked about, what he's kind of tried to do with Batman White Knight, and I do think it'll be worth getting into. So Sean Murphy is, generally speaking, liberal. He's a Christian, but he's a liberal Christian. He's got generally left-wing views. Classical American liberal, let's put it that way. But with White Knight, what he's done is a lot of left-wing rhetoric, but he's framed it in such a way that has made people in the right wing like it a lot, which is interesting. And he's talked about this a little bit, where he's kind of trying to do the catch more flies with honey thing. So in like the first issue, you have, or second issue rather, you have Jack Napier doing all these big political speeches, and then you have anchors on the news, again, Dark Knight Returns reference, it's not even a reference, it's just a thing we do now since the Dark Knight Returns. But you have anchors on the news talking about, like, SJW politics and stuff like this. And so by having the Joker have all this left-wing rhetoric come out, and Batman fighting against it, at least in the early issues, he's very much attracted some guys on the far right to read his stuff and listen to his points, because he's being critical of the points he's having Joker make. And I don't know what the effect has been now that it's all come to the point and Batman has decided the Joker was right at least about some things, I don't know what effect that's having on the people that read this book hoping it was going to be like a takedown, an owning of the libs.
Yeah.
And that makes me extremely curious. What did you think of it? Like, did you get the sense that that's kind of what was going on in the background here, or did none of that register for you?
I was picking up on, like, especially like a lot of that language, like the newscaster openly mentioning SJWs, and like I was getting a sense that there was some kind of, I don't want to say agenda, because that's always used as a negative way, but it's an agenda. It's just a lot of times when people say that, they mean it in a very negative way. But when you have a goal, when you're telling a story and it has a political bent and you're trying to tell a message along with that story, then there is an agenda. It doesn't have to be a bad thing necessarily. So I did get the feeling that there was some of that going on. I wasn't necessarily sure if he was trying to like engage in some kind of dialogue with people of the opposite political views.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really interesting thing to do, and is certainly, if you're willing to spend the time on it, it's worth the effort. But I just don't know how much blood you're going to get from a stone. Is the way I'll put it nicely. I think a lot of, maybe this is me being too close-minded or something, I don't know. But I think the natural inclination within conservative thought is to not think about it, is to not question your own perceptions. I think that's kind of the definition behind conservatism, is what we have works, there's no need to change it. And so when you bring up societal problems in a conservative discussion, the onus is always on the individual to deal with the circumstances and just be better or just overcome it. That's often the narrative you hear around conservatism, and sometimes that's a fine narrative that can be good. But I think to always write it off that it's almost always on the individual is just factually inaccurate and it ignores the reality of living in a society. So I'm trying to use small words here, but I feel like I've made my point there. So that seems to be the general mindset of conservatism. And so I know tons of leftists, and they all argue and bicker with each other, and in all honesty, they are constantly questioning their own perceptions, their own beliefs, and stuff. I don't think that happens in conservatism, which makes it so hard to engage in a dialogue with people of a right-wing bend. How well this works, because I know I saw people liking it before we get the turn that, no, actually Joker's right. How well it works as to changing people's minds in the right, or making them question their own stances more, I have no idea. Though I'm certainly curious. So, I don't know, just something, food for thought, something worth thinking about and wondering about. Okay, that's the last thing I wanted to make sure I brought up, I think. Yeah, I think I'm good on stuff. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I think I should have made notes when I was reading this Monday. I think we covered just about everything that I was wanting to cover. Okay. I think I come down. I am going to buy it when it comes out in trade. I'm going to, because I think it's going to, if anything, I really appreciate that this is its own standalone story, because far too often with both Marvel and DC, I guess get put off by, oh, this is built on like 15 years of other stories that I haven't read. No thanks, I don't want to read that. So I really like that this is its own thing. It's by itself. It's not part of some 15-year run. You have like the Jonathan Hickman run on Avengers or the Scott Snyder run on Batman or whatever. Like, this is its own 8-issue thing. I appreciate that it's a limited, by itself, self-contained story. And I'm very much looking forward to when we start getting stories from the Black Label. I don't know, has that started yet, or is it still to come?
It hasn't begun yet. And this is like, it's interesting because people are asking Murphy, would he have published White Knight under the Black Label if it existed at the time? And he goes, actually, White Knight's kind of the reason, or at least part of the reason we're getting the Black Label. Like, they weren't sure if people would read stuff that wasn't in continuity, that was just kind of off on its own thing. They weren't sure if they could market and sell monthly series that were more adult-oriented. And White Knight selling so well is kind of the reason that the Black Label got to go ahead. So White Knight is kind of the forerunner of Black Label. And I mean, DC's been doing it for years, right? But like, DC and Marvel have both been doing these offshoot continuity-free things for years. But like, this particular iteration of it, White Knight's kind of the forerunner of. And I did think of one other thing that we need to talk about, but go ahead and say what you're going to say.
Well, I was going to say, if anything, I'm glad that we are getting, like, and I may not even like everything that comes out of the Black Label, but I'm really excited about, hey, you haven't been reading Wonder Woman for the last 5 years? Well, here's a story of Wonder Woman that is just by itself. It's just a Wonder Woman story. You can read it. It's kind of like the Earth 1 stuff, where I don't like everything that came out of the Earth 1 books, but I like that we're getting a book that you can just read. Like, if you want to like the Teen Titans, but you haven't liked anything coming out of the DC universe involving the Titans for years, then here's Earth 1. It's just its own thing. I'm glad we're getting that with the Black Label now, and so I appreciate this for at least helping start that off.
Yeah. Okay, so then the other thing that's worth talking about, and that Murphy has teased about almost since like issue 2, that he's talked about because of how damn well the sales went. I think White Knight #1 got like 4 printings, which is just unheard of in this day and age, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, Volume 2. I mean, based on the ending, there almost has to be a Volume 2 now at this point, with Bruce Wayne saying that he's going to come out and reveal his identity to the public and all that stuff. There has to, it is required to have a Volume 2 at this point. Speculation, thinking stuff, but go ahead. What was your question?
I was gonna ask you that. What do you think the plot of Volume 2 would be? I guess they could bring in Jason Todd.
That's what I was thinking too. Batman, Red Knight. You know, that's like it's maybe way too obvious. But to be fair, I much prefer this setup for Jason Todd than I do. I mean, can we all just acknowledge that Death in the Family is like the worst story ever, and the only reason anyone remembers it is because Jason Todd dies?
Yes, I don't think people realize this is a story where the Joker becomes the ambassador to Iran. Can we just put that out there? Like, it's a ridiculous story.
You have no idea. Someone tried to argue with me that was a brilliant stroke of political commentary.
No.
I remember being in a college course and someone tried to argue with me about that. Like, the Joker then became the ambassador of Iran, which is this really interesting social commentary on America's feelings toward Iran at the time, because that's when the hostage crisis was going on. I'm like, no, shut the fuck up. They were not thinking of that. They weren't. That was just dumb. That was just a dumb idea because they didn't know what they were doing because they were out of ideas, and their idea of how to kill Jason Todd was to fucking have the fans vote for it. It was a terrible idea.
Yeah, and I think also I've heard, now, I haven't read a whole lot of Jason Todd outside of that story. I mean, before, like, excluding everything that came when they brought him back to life,
Okay, because I was about to say Red Hood lost. Anything that Winnick wrote with Jason Todd is good. Anything Winnick wrote, and also Battle for the Cow is surprisingly alright, as well as the rest of the stuff Grant Morrison did with him in Batman and Robin.
I think I've read Battle for the Cow. I either read that or I read a book called Battle for the Cow Companion, but which was, just like a side fluff piece. But looking at like the 1980s stuff with Jason Todd, like there's not a whole lot of trades, and I'm mostly just a trade guy, but there's not a whole lot of trades that collect like Jason Todd before he died. But it seems to me that Jason wasn't that, like, he has this reputation of being a bad boy who, like, he was crazy and he had to go. Like, we couldn't let him be around anymore. There's one issue, I think, where he lets someone fall to their death. Like, he chooses not to save them. But outside of that, he was pretty much a stand-up guy. And then Death in the Family suddenly paints him as being, like, well, in, like, one scene where Batman is like, you can't be Robin anymore. But then they're still buddies throughout that whole book. Like, they're still friends. So, anyway, it's bad.
Yeah. So, I've gotten a little tired of bringing Jason Todd back and all this stuff. But it seems like that's the obvious direction to go in if you're going to do the Volume 2, which almost has to happen at this point. It seems that Jason Todd being the driving force behind it, maybe being that return to more brutal methods with, like, the further right swing of what we should be doing to criminals, that Batman's gone too soft or something like that, that he let the Joker manipulate him with his SJW beta male cuck politics. Like, that seems like there's definitely potential for a story to be told there, and that this definitely sets up the possibility of that. And I'd be fine with that. There's definitely, the groundwork has been laid, and I'd be okay with that. The other characters that like, when we were just getting the early stirrings before we had anything to go off in the books that I thought Sean Gordon Murphy could maybe do stuff with, I feel like Harvey Dent, Two-Face, would have been a pretty good character for especially for a Volume 2. I don't know, something about that could have been really interesting. I don't really know what they're going to do with the title of the book, though. Because White Knight kind of only works for the Joker.
Yeah.
Like, that he is pale white and all that stuff. Like, that's a pun that really only works for the Joker. The original title of the book was meant to be Joker White Knight, but DC didn't think it would sell, so they changed it to Batman White Knight.
That's weird. I mean, we had, back when The Dark Knight came out, we had a graphic novel called Joker.
Yeah, and it's bad, but okay.
Yeah, it's not great. It's another one where Joker's released from Arkham. I was thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a bad story.
And that one's even worse, because it just shows him just walking out the gate.
Yeah. God, that is such a bad story. Anyway, yeah, like the idea that a book called Joker White Knight wouldn't sell, I'm like, really, y'all? Really? Like, I don't know. Like, you put Joker Death of the Family and Joker Endgame on Scott Snyder's Batman trades. I feel like that's more of a problem for sales than Joker White Knight would be, since it's a standalone series, but whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
They can do whatever they want. They're DC. I feel the title works either way, but I don't know. If you're going to call it White Knight Volume 2, it would make a lot... Keeping the Batman title makes a lot more sense for doing consecutive volumes, because Batman Red Knight would make a lot more sense than Joker Red Knight, or Batman White Knight Volume 2 Red Knight. Like, I really hope that if you do second volume, titles matter. We don't talk about this enough, but titles matter. I mentioned it last week when I mentioned Lex Luthor Man of Steel. That title matters, and now that the movie Man of Steel has come out, in which the title didn't matter, by the way. Now that the movie Man of Steel has come out, we don't, like, consecutive printings of Lex Luthor Man of Steel have just renamed the book Lex Luthor, and that's an awful thing to do, because that title matters. And so, yeah, titles matter, and White Knight is a title that really matters here, and I don't want, just for the sake of marketing, the thing to be called Batman White Knight Volume 2 Red Knight or something like that. It really needs to, unless, I don't know, it depends on what it's going to do, but you kind of need to keep the White Knight exclusive to Joker, and the Batman banner in front of it would work perfectly well to do, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing Red Knight, that'd be fine. I don't know, just things to think about. But yeah, my mind went to Jason Todd as well, especially with the setup that he wasn't killed, he was released. Mm-hmm. And his last words were, "I hate Bruce," or "I wish I'd never met Bruce Wayne."
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and go on to ratings. Why don't you go first? Because I think you might have the more interesting score. But let me ask you a question before you go. At the beginning of this, you said you didn't really like it that much. Through talking to me, has your opinion changed at all?
Not that much. I still think that it's not for me. I think there's going to be a lot of people who will really like it. And I think there are some things about it I do like, but I don't think it's enough for me to say that it's a great book or even necessarily a good book. I think it's okay. So I would put that right under good. But I still think I would have to say, going out of a scale of 1 to 5, I would do like a 2.5 Batmobiles out of 5.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I enjoyed it quite a bit. There are definitely still problems, but again, nothing book breaking. And for me, this is good. So I will give this 4 out of 5 Harley Quinns. Different versions of Harley Quinns. That'll be the trademark for Batman White Knight Volume 2, the third and fourth Harley.
Oh yeah.
All right, like Joker's just got like an American Idol style audition for new Harley Quinns.
That would actually be great.
Yeah. All right. Well, Ruben, we need a discussion topic for next week. What have you got for me?
Okay, I've been kind of like dancing around trying to figure out what we should talk about. I'm thinking we need to talk about when these days it seems like in movies, it seems like every movie that comes out, at least as far as like science fiction and fantasy, which is mostly what I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in like movies that could be set in the real world. Like rom-coms are not really for me. Based on a true story, not for me at all. So movies that are like science fiction and fantasy, it seems like these days, and you could say this has been going on for a while, we are obsessed with franchise. We have to, if you're going to do a movie, we have to already have plans for a sequel. And not just a sequel, but these days, like a shared universe. Like we recently got the trailer for a new Robin Hood movie, and apparently this is supposed to be part of a shared universe of Robin Hood. I don't even understand how that happens, how that could work. But like they're already planning a franchise for this Robin Hood movie, and it's probably just going to be this one movie. It's probably not going to do well enough to be its own franchise. But I guess I just want to talk about like trying to like. It seems like we had an era of movie making where you just had plans to make the movie, and then if it did well, you would do a sequel. And sometimes not even like sometimes you would only do a sequel if you had a story for it. So I guess I just want to talk about how that's changed in movies over the years.
So franchises' effects on filmmaking.
Yes, yeah, I could have said that. Yeah.
Ruben, for a little WRTR throwback, brevity is the soul of wit.
Yeah. Or I think in my video, soul of twit, I think, when I did that Twitter review.
Nice. Yeah, so anyway, that sounds good. That sounds like it's definitely worth talking about. All right, everyone. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am the Comics Kid 2099.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.